Sometimes, a house seems like an answer to your prayers. For the Snedeker family, it was big, it was affordable, and it was close to the hospital where their son was fighting for his life. It was perfect. But they didn't know that the low price came with a horrifying secret hidden in the basement. In 1986, Carmen and Al Snedeker were facing every parent's worst nightmare. Their eldest son, Philip, was battling a rare and aggressive form of cancer, and the grueling treatments were taking their toll. The long, exhausting drives to the Yukon Health Center in Connecticut were becoming unbearable for the already struggling family. They needed a solution, a place to call home that would ease their burden. That's when they found it. A large 2-story house for rent in Southington, Connecticut. The price was remarkably low, and its proximity to the hospital felt like a sign, a small mercy in a time of overwhelming hardship. They believed they had found a sanctuary, a haven where their family could find some semblance of peace while Philip fought for his life. Little did they know, they weren't just moving into a new house. They were stepping into a pre-existing nightmare, one that had been festering for decades in the shadows of the home's dark history. As soon as they moved in, they discovered the truth. The basement was not a normal basement. It was a mortuary. The tools of death were still there. They realized that thousands of dead bodies had been prepared for their final journey right beneath their feet, and some of them, it seemed, had never left. While exploring their new home, Carmen made a chilling discovery in the basement. It was a room unlike any other she had ever seen in a residential house. The cold, concrete space was filled with grim relics of a forgotten trade. A large, metal embalming table stood ominously in the center of the room, its stained surface hinting at countless final procedures. A heavy-duty hoist system, designed for lifting coffins, hung from the ceiling, its chains dangling like a metal specter. In drawers and on shelves, they found other mortuary tools, trocars, scalpels, and draining tubes. It was then that the horrifying reality became clear. Their new home had once been the Hallahan Funeral Home, a business that had operated on the premises for decades. The basement, the very foundation of their supposed sanctuary, had been a preparation room for the dead. The realization sent a cold dread through the family. They were living, eating, and sleeping directly above a place saturated with the sorrow and finality of death. This wasn't just a house with a past. It was a house built on the echoes of the deceased. Because of his radiation treatments, Philip was highly sensitive to paranormal energy. He was the first to see them. The spirits of the dead. A thin man with black hair and eyes like pits. At first, they only watched, but then they began to change Philip. He became withdrawn, violent, and started writing terrifying poetry about communicating with the dead. To accommodate the large family, the basement was converted into a bedroom. Since it was the coolest part of the house, it was given to Philip, whose cancer treatments left him feeling perpetually feverish. It was down in that grim, converted mortuary that the haunting began. Philip was the first to experience the phenomena. He described seeing apparitions that tormented him in the darkness. One was a tall, unnervingly thin man with high cheekbones and stark white hair. Another was a younger man with long, black hair, whose feet dangled unnaturally above the floor, as if he were hanging from an invisible rope. These spectral figures were not just passive observers. Their presence began to exert a terrifying influence on Philip. His personality underwent a drastic and disturbing transformation. The once gentle boy became withdrawn, sullen, and prone to sudden, violent outbursts. He started writing dark, disturbing poetry and sketching grotesque images of the figures he saw. He claimed they were talking to him, telling him things. The family watched in horror as their son, already fighting a physical battle for his life, seemed to be losing a spiritual one in the haunted darkness of the basement. The entity no longer targeted just Philip. It attacked the whole family. Water in the house turned the color of blood. Religious symbols were desecrated. More terrifyingly, both Carmen and Al were brutally attacked in the night by unseen entities. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war zone. What began in the basement soon spread like a contagion through the rest of the house, escalating from unsettling visions to direct physical assaults. The entire Snedeker family found themselves under siege by an unseen force. One of the most terrifying manifestations involved a mop bucket. Carmen was cleaning the kitchen floor when the water in the bucket suddenly turned a deep blood-red color. The mop then began to move on its own, dragging the blood-like liquid across the floor, leaving behind eerie, cross-shaped patterns. The family's faith was also targeted. Crucifixes they had placed around the house for protection were repeatedly found inverted, a classic sign of demonic mockery. The phenomena grew even more sinister. In the dead of night, Carmen and her husband Al were physically and sexually assaulted by invisible forces in their own bedroom. They felt hands on them, violating and tormenting them as they lay paralyzed by fear. The house had turned on them completely. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner, held the promise of a new horror. The dream of a peaceful home had dissolved into a living hell. In their desperation, they turned to the most famous paranormal investigators of the time, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens declared that the house was infested not just with wandering spirits, but also with a demonic entity that had been drawn to the necromantic energy of the funeral home. They said the family was in real danger. Pushed to the brink of their sanity, the Snedekers reached out for help. They contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned demonologists and paranormal investigators whose work on cases like the Amityville haunting had made them famous. The Warrens arrived at the Southington home and immediately began their investigation. Ed, a demonologist, and Lorraine, a gifted clairvoyant, sensed the gravity of the situation. Upon entering the basement, Lorraine was reportedly overwhelmed by a powerful and malevolent presence. She described the evil in the house as palpable, something she could physically feel pressing in on her. After a thorough investigation, which included interviews with the family and a psychic walkthrough of the property, the Warrens came to a chilling conclusion. The house was not merely haunted by residual spirits of those who had passed through the funeral home. It was a site of a demonic infestation. They believed that the necromantic rituals and the sheer volume of death that had occurred there had acted as a beacon. attracting a non-human entity that was now feeding on the family sphere and the lingering energy of the dead. The Warrens warned the Snedekers that they were not just dealing with ghosts. They were in a spiritual battle with a powerful demonic force. An official exorcism was performed to cleanse the house. Witnesses reported that during the ritual, the entire house seemed to groan and resist. After hours of prayer and confrontation, the evil presence was finally expelled, and the house was declared clean. With the Warrens' confirmation of a demonic presence, the next step was clear. The house needed a spiritual cleansing. In 1988, an official exorcism was arranged with the assistance of the Catholic Church. Several priests arrived to perform the lengthy and intense rite of exorcism on the home itself. Ed and Lorraine Warren were present, lending their support and expertise. According to accounts from those who were there, the ritual was a dramatic and terrifying event. As the priests moved through the house, chanting prayers and sprinkling holy water, the building itself seemed to react violently. Unearthly groans and terrifying sounds echoed from the walls and floorboards, as if the entity was fighting back. The air grew heavy and cold, and the entire structure reportedly shook and vibrated. For hours, the priests engaged in a spiritual confrontation, demanding that the evil presence leave the home and its inhabitants in peace. Finally, after a prolonged and arduous battle, a sense of calm descended upon the house. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The exorcism was complete, and the house was declared spiritually clean. The Snedeker family survived the nightmare. Their story, which later became the film A Haunting in Connecticut, is one of the most terrifying modern hauntings ever recorded. It leaves behind a chilling warning for anyone looking for a new home. Always ask one critical question: what happened here before we came?